To explain the tangled nest of laws that guide the NCLB, let's look at Title I. Title I is a $15 billion federal grant program that gives, or is supposed to give, extra money to low-income and underperforming schools. There's a complicated formula that comes along with this program, but essentially the grant gives assistance to schools which are serving low-income families in an attempt to bridge the education gap. The different levels of grants are as follows. A basic grant provides funds to LEAs, or local education agencies, to smaller school districts which exceed at least 2% of the LEA's school-age population. A concentration grant is given to LEAs where the number of students exceeds 6,500, or 15% of the total school-age population. Targeted grants are based on the same data used for the other grants, except the data is weighted so the LEAs with higher numbers of higher percentages of children from low-income families receive more funds. Education finance incentive grants give funds based on a state's effort to provide financial support for education compared to its relative wealth as measured by its per capita income and the degree to which education expenditures among LEAs within the state are equal. So in districts and states where income distribution is uneven, a school in an affluent district might receive more funds simply because the income levels are technically low, and gerrymandering districts also compounds the potential issues with this. The real problem isn't with the federal funding, it's with the school's ability to fundraise. Fundraising can be the difference between a school flushed with technology and brand new books to the school with books more than 10 years old. In poor neighborhoods where people are barely getting by, fundraising can be difficult. They would need at least the money provided by the federal government to be able to keep the school open.
A Christmas miracle, a bipartisan bill signing right here.
A new law passed in 2015 called Every Student Succeeds Act, and it weighs in at a hefty 391 pages. NPR states that under the new law, in order to get Title I money, districts have to prove that, among other things, that they are using state and local dollars to provide roughly the same services to kids in poor and non-poor schools alike. Liz King said in a May interview that basically schools with a school district have to be similar, end quote. Some would say that the problem is the gap, and without filling it, it would be near impossible to provide the same level of service. It seems quite difficult for a failing school to dig its way out of the hole of poor testing grades without extra funds, and this law seems to prevent them from getting the supplemental income it needs to dig its way out. Schools that need the money the most can't possibly hope to be similar to those who are not struggling. It has gotten so bad that even the Board of Education is claiming that money is not going to low-income schools at the rate that it should, further handicapping them. The idea, Liz King goes on to say, is that if they're not similar, then these federal dollars are just going to fill the gaps. Some would argue that filling in the gaps left there by the NCLB is the point of Title I. Title I is a sort of last-ditch effort to prevent school closure in a district by giving the school more resources with which to work with. These programs also grant tutors to underperforming schools, but parents often find they must fight with the school district to get funds for programs like this. The reason there is such a heated debate over the Title I program is that in a very obvious way, it undermines the language of the NCLB.
Title I is the largest and most expensive federal K-12 program today. It costs the federal government $15 billion and is designed to prop up poor school districts in order to give the students there the same educational opportunities as students in rich districts. It turns out, however, Title I money isn't only going to impoverished districts. In fact, millions of dollars are going to the wealthiest school districts in the country.
The issue at hand is that those who support the NCLB and believe that it works don't like the undermining language and benefits of Title I, and therefore seek to undermine it. One of the stipulations in the NCLB is that a school must be tested in one grade in elementary, middle, and high school. So for the example of a high school, a student must have sufficiently learned the areas of study that the State Board of Education deems appropriate. Some critics have stated that the law puts too much pressure on the teachers and school administrators, and therefore the students are also pressured to succeed. And the reason for the panic surrounding standardized testing is that if a school does not meet the AYP, or adequate yearly progress, the school is then sanctioned, and the state loses a portion of its federal funds. This law also applies to schools receiving Title I money in underserved communities where large schools of lower income students are typical. So if Title I were to bypass the law, NCLB would be seen as useless. A report from Brookings by Mark Denarky and Kristen Keynes tells a different story, however, stating that federal funding of Title I schools is relatively low, averaging about $500 to $600 a year per student, and that those funds rarely go to effective programs and instead fund teacher professional development and after-school programs. The article claims that many studies have shown that professional development courses for teachers are ineffective, which appears to be true, but only part of the truth. An article from the Center of Public Education states that it is not professional development that is the problem in and of itself, but that the development teacher experience is mostly workshop-based, which has been shown to be ineffective. It seems that the key to effective training for a teacher is to receive more than a once-a-year workshop, but a combination of techniques throughout the year, including peer coaching, peer observation, and research programs dedicated to improving teacher education. If Title I were to go away in its current form and funds get cut from needy schools, what can happen is a term that some financial sector people are familiar with called a death spiral. In finance, it is used to describe how a bank spirals out of control when at the brink of collapse. They take on loans that allow investors to devalue the stock at below market prices and usually leads the bank to losing control of the company, or in some cases, is devalued so low that it essentially collapses under its own debt. In education, this death spiral happens when a school falls behind so much that the funds they get are no longer enough to keep the school running, and after failing to meet goals for several years in a row and with funds continually cut every year, the school finally closes their doors and shuts down.
I don't have reading books.
Now they don't bring books home, and everything is Xerox copy. They're little kids, they don't take great notes, so without books, it's a problem for the parents to help.
10% of schools in the U.S. are labeled as failing to meet standards. That means 10% of schools which are not receiving the full funds they need to operate and improve upon their curriculum may, if the trend continues, face closure. According to a survey by the National Center for Educational Statistics in 2003, just 2 years after the NCLB was passed, the U.S. set a record for school closures since 1995 with 2,168 school closings that year. And that's up over double the previous numbers from 1995 and nearly double the numbers through the year 2000. In 2017, 38 Michigan schools were marked for closure, and in 2018, another 35 are in danger of failing. When a school fails or is marked for closure, what happens? Michigan Radio, a branch of NPR, stated that in the neighborhoods I visited where there had been a school and the school was then closed, the vast majority of the houses around the school would be vacant. We do know property values go down, crime often goes up, and families move because, especially in Detroit, there's not a lot of public transportation, so they move where the next school is. So what happens to the students that are left without a school when it shuts down? They move and are dispersed amongst the schools and other districts, which moves the problem of failing students and students whose achievement rates are already low to a school that is not yet equipped to handle the amount of incoming students. But the schools don't always have to shut down. Sometimes the state can take over management of the school.
This is America. What does that mean to people? And I don't think it's bad for me to say that or ask people that. I mean, public education needs to be taken back by the public. Wouldn't that be a novel idea? The public needs to get involved. What is it that you want? Are you sheep? Is this the United States, sheep? Or is this America? Barry, ask everyone, not what is education? What is America to you? Because I think the America you see is the America you're going to have. I use some of those shades that are missing. You see that? They left Mrs. Pugh's garden. That's a dead school service assistant that used to work at Handstein. They don't even know what that Mrs. Pugh's garden means. That's a tree, a weed they should have cut down. That's a tree that's invasive that they should have gotten rid of. I see the hostas are still there. And those are the guys.
In the Atlantic article about the topic, superintendents are often replaced, sometimes on a yearly basis, and in other cases, the entire central office. The state replaces them with people unfamiliar with the school, which critics contend, according to the Atlantic article, has little impact on whether the school meets their mandated goals. The impact differs depending on whether a single school fails or if a district is failing as a whole.
I know this isn't easy, and believe me, I didn't come to this decision easily.
With the mayor of Camden at his side, Governor Christie announced the state is taking over the Camden City Schools. The state has had fiscal control of Camden schools for a decade, but now the governor wants to take over all aspects of the school district because, he said, the public schools here are among the lowest performing in the state.
Nearly 90% of Camden schools, 23 out of 26, are in the bottom 5% performance-wise of all in New Jersey, including the 3 lowest performing schools in the state.
But in the cases for New Jersey, which currently oversees 3 districts, Jersey City, Newark, and Paterson, 3 districts which, even under state control, continue to struggle since 1995 to serve high-poverty schools. With local government exercising more and more control over how we learn, can they influence what we learn as well?
It's one of the most important jobs in Texas. There are 15 bills floating around here to strip your authority, to make sure that you have nothing to do with curriculum and nothing to do with selecting textbooks, is that you as chair have done everything conceivably possible to make sure that intelligent design is what is taught in the state's textbooks. How would you respond to that?
The question is, did I try to put intelligent design in the books? I'd say that'd be false. Absolutely.
That you've done everything possible as chairman to push that point of view.
No, sir.
What would you say? How would you respond to that?
I would say it's not true. I would say I did everything I did to bring up some of the scientific difficulties of evolution. I would say that would be absolutely true.